very welcome to the Irish Military Museum. Thanks to Stephanie and William for inviting me here today to give a talk that I haven't given before. So this is a first. You're getting the juicy stuff. And the theme, of course, which ties in with the museum is battles and war, specifically war in Irish myth and legend. A brief introduction, just in case you don't know me. My name's Anthony Murphy. I'm an author and tour guide and photographer, and I've been writing books about all this stuff first one was published in 2006, but the writing started in 1999, so what's that, 27 years now. A lot of the subject matter today relates to myths and legends that have a tie to this area. An awful lot of the action of particularly the invasion mythology and the idea of, waves of arrivals coming in, they quite often have very strong ties to not just the east, but to the Boyne Valley, to the ancient place that was called Brega, which is basically the modern county of Meath. And there's even a nice connection with Louth through the place name, which I'll hopefully, but you're not probably all from Louth. I know there's one man here from Cath, so anybody from Louth here? Safety in numbers, good. So I'm from Louth myself. We don't have a brilliant track record in the GAA. So for years and years, we just sat still when the Meath fans slagged us off. But in recent years, we've been able to throw a bit of that back. Anyway, so in terms of battles and wars, more specifically, and remember, this is myth and legend ostensibly. So, by and large, these are events that are fantastic. They're extraordinary in detail. And when you read it, you kind of go, that didn't really happen. But as with all myths, you always get the impression that some of it may be inspired by real events or based upon things that actually happen between mortal human beings. So, our story, the story that we were given in the Middle Ages by ecclesiastical scribes, monks mostly, wrote our myths down in the Middle Ages. And until then, most myth had survived by being told orally. So the bards recited all these stories from memory. And if you don't think that's interesting, let me just draw your attention to something. When we were in secondary school, the Christian brothers had us read the Iliad and told us that Homer had recited this. He didn't write it. It was written by somebody else. He knew it by heart. And I thought that was amazing because if you've ever read it, it's a long book, Well, in like fashion, probably the longest of the epics, the sagas, in relation to Irish battles would be Táin Cuailnge, the cattle raid of Cooley. And likewise, that story was told entirely from memory. And in the Middle Ages, when these stories have been written down, imagine a scenario. You're in what's called a scriptorium, a small cold stone building, about probably a quarter or an eighth the size of this room. And there's a monk at a slab with vellum sheets, with a candle. And there's a bard standing beside the monk. And the bard is telling the story, and the monk's writing it down. And what are the difficulties with that? I'm always amazed about this. The difficulties are that the monks, for centuries after the arrival of Christianity, a few miles in that direction, Hill of Slane, St. Patrick, Paschal Fire, 432 AD, after the arrival of Christianity, the first writing was by the monks. They were missals, prayer books, versions of the Gospels. Of course, I don't think at that stage the Book of Kells, I think it's later. But they're writing in Latin. And they have to learn this language that's called Irish. And scholars who've read the manuscripts in the modern era tell us that that version of Irish is an archaic, much older version of the language. They call it Middle Irish. So if you think of Middle Ages, Middle Irish. And this is the hilarious part. The monk is writing this, he's listening to the bard reciting the story and he's writing it down. And then he's saying, you say the Battle of Finntraigh, how do you spell that? And the bard isn't able to tell him. The bard doesn't read or write. And so often what happens is, as a result, is that particularly proper nouns, place names and character names, they get written down and are spelled different ways in the same manuscript, and sometimes different ways on the same page of vellum. And that's the backdrop against which we're exploring this theme, is the recognition that the myth, that most of what I'm talking about today is based on manuscripts that are centuries old. But remember that by the time those were written down, those stories were probably already very ancient. And so it would be my contention that some of what's in the manuscripts goes back into prehistory. So we have about 300 manuscripts. And scholars in recent years, using statistical models and as much information as they can glean from medieval sources, would estimate that what survives is actually only about 1/10 of what was there. So in other words, originally there were 3,000 manuscripts. So we often see references in one manuscript to another manuscript. The Book of Drumsneachta is a particularly good example because it's referred to in so many other manuscripts, but it's lost. We don't know what happened to it. Unfortunately, in the 9th and 10th centuries AD, the Vikings repeatedly attacked Ireland, and their first targets and their most regular targets through that couple of centuries were monasteries. Why? Well, first of all, monasteries offered treasures, and the books were treasures. But not so much the books of vellum themselves, but the cases that came in. Very ornate wooden and metal cases with gold filigree decorations on them. So what did they do? Unfortunately, half the time they rip the book out of the box, steal the box as treasure, throw the book into a bog, into a lake, or, unfortunately, as we know they did, for instance, at Slane, there was a monastery at Slane, and there was a round tower at Slane that doesn't exist anymore, and Slane was harried by the Vikings a total of 7 times, and at least on a couple of occasions it was burnt. So when they set fire to the monastery, the books are going up in flames, unfortunately. So, today I'm talking specifically about 4 major wars in the storyline, as it were. One is Cath Moytura, which is not just one Battle of Moytura, but in fact 2. The battles, plural, of Moytura. Táin Cuailnge, which I think most people will have some knowledge of. I'm sure you've all heard of Cuailnge, right? There's hardly an Irish person who hasn't heard of Cuailnge. I'll talk briefly about the Battle of Finntraigh, Battle of Finntraigh or Finntraigh, literally the White Strand. So, I don't know if any of you have ever been. Finntraigh in Dingle. Well, that's the scene of this battle. And the other one is the Battle of Tailtiu, the Battle of Tailtiu. And Tailtiu is very important for reasons that I hope we'll see. So, going back to the first one, the Battle of Moytura, I only have some sort of prompt notes, but I don't intend to use them. Moytura is fascinating. Moytura, I suppose, just to preempt that, the creation story of the Irish was cobbled together by the monks. It's called Leabhar Gabhála Éireann, which literally translates as the Book of Takings of Ireland. The Book of Takings, commonly called the Book of Invasions. And it basically was what we would call a synthesized creation story for the Irish. The monks listened to what was indigenous lore, and then they mixed it up with their own biblical narratives and some classical sources. And they created a synthetic story. So, for instance, Leabhar Gabhála tells us that Ireland was uninhabited and that the first person to come to Ireland was Cessair, Cessair, and Cessair was said to have been a granddaughter of Noah. So you can see straight away The monk is trying to make the Irish creation story connect with the Bible, and particularly Genesis. There's a huge amount of material in Irish myth that is inspired by Genesis. Cath asks her grandfather, knowing that the flood is coming, she asks her grandfather if she can come on the ark, and he denies her. He says, no, I don't think it's exactly extrapolated like this, but my own version of it is he tells her, no, sure, don't you know, I have to bring 2 of every kind of animal, there'll be no room for you. Imagine prioritising small creatures over your own flesh and blood. But anyway, that's what the monks tell us. Cath set sail for Ireland on a boat with 3 men on it and 50 women. Conscious of the fact that there is at least one youngster in the audience, treat this material very sensitively. One of the men died on the way over from exhaustion. You can fill in the blanks. And another was killed when an oar was shoved into an orifice where it shouldn't be put. And the sole survivor of the men, Finntraigh, who shunned the attention of the women, was the only survivor of the flood, according to our myth. And so he survived by going up into a cave on the top of a hill or a mountain in Tipperary called Cuailnge. It's called like the mountain under wave because of this story. And he survived by turning into a salmon. Swam in the flood water, and then eventually turned into a hawk and an eagle and soared over the land as the flood dissipated. Guess what we're told in myth? The salmon of knowledge, which was caught in the Boyne River. If you've ever heard a version of that says it was caught in different parts of Ireland, it's a folk tale that's spread around the place, but the only manuscript version places it very firmly in the bend of the Boyne, looking across at Knowth and Newgrange, believe it or not, at a place called Rossnaree, Fiach's Pool. And the salmon was given a name. The salmon of knowledge was called Finntraigh. And Finntraigh became something of a sort of an ancestor deity, a source he lived for 5,000 years. And whenever people needed to reconnect with their ancient mythology and the story of Ireland and what had happened over the thousands of years, they consulted Finntraigh. So Finntraigh was it's a beautiful story, but of course it's tied in with this biblical narrative. And then we have successive waves of arrivals into Ireland. We have the Partholonians, Partholon and his people who came to Ireland. There were, I think, maybe 1,000 or a couple of thousand of them. And they were all killed by a plague. They all died in the space of a week. And they were all buried in mounds in a place called Táin, Moytura, Partholon. And if you recognise the first part of that name, Tallaght in County Dublin, is exactly where we're told the Partholonians were buried. So that's where Tallaght gets its name, Táin, Moytura, Partholon. Then Nemed, the Nemedians, and then the Fervolog, and then the Tuatha Dé Danann, and finally the Milesians. And conveniently, the Milesians are the only ones that we can definitively say were mortals. The rest appear to be either semi-divine or entirely divine. But of course the difficulty with this is, when the monks were writing this stuff down, they were greatly troubled by something. They were having to write down ostensibly pagan mythology. They were writing about what was clear to them were deities. And their first commandment, which is, thou shalt have no other gods before me, forbade them, and forbade any suggestion of belief in any deity other than the one true God. So it was a challenge for them. And the reasons they end up writing this stuff down are very complex, but relate to basically the fact that monastic sites and settlements relied on the cooperation of the kings in Ireland. It was the pagan kings who gave them land so that they could build their monasteries and farm, and often protected them as well. So it's kind of a you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours kind of relationship. That's what ends up happening. The monks, in return, are expected to write down the lore, the myths and legends of the king and his people, the genealogies of the king and his people, the place name mythology, the origin stories, Din Shanachas, etc., etc. So that's a little bit of the background. Moytura is There's two battles. There's one in Cuailnge in County Mayo, and the second one, which is much better known, the second Battle of Moytura happens in Sligo. And there is a place today in Sligo called Moytura. The Irish word M-A-G in Middle Irish, you would see it in lots of place names today. You see Moy, M-O-Y is generally the anglicisation of this word, M-A-G-H, my for a plain. So Mayo, Mayo, the plain of O, E-O. So Moytura is an actual place. And quite often with these myths, you have this idea of fantastic events, supernatural events, unlikely events, but they're set in a specific landscape. And an awful lot of the place names from those myths survive into modern times. So I mentioned there the Finntraigh, the first Battle of Moytura was between the Cuailnge and the Finntraigh. One of the kings of the Finntraigh was a king called Cuailnge. And if you recognise that name, the anglicisation of that name would be Slain. Again, where Patrick lit the Paschal fire, just a few miles away from us here. Cuailnge was the Finntraigh kings divided Ireland into 5 provinces or segments, and Cuailnge ruled the largest of them. And the dividing line between his province and the next one was the River Boyne. And he was buried in a mound on the hill of Slain, according to myth. And that's where Slain gets its name from. And by a fascinating coincidence, it's not really a coincidence, but it is fascinating that there is a mound on the top of the hill of Slain that most people never see. Because when you go up to Slain, all you see are the monastic remains, which I think is intentionally done over the centuries to Christianise the site. But before Christianity, there's definitely a burial mound on the top of that hill that has been investigated in the past couple of decades by archaeologists. Now, they haven't dug it, but they've looked into it using non-invasive methods, and it's a moat, so it was supposed to be a castle moat. The Fleming family, who were the Anglo-Norman settlers of Slain, built a fortified castle mound. But as with all these things, the Mill Mount in Drogheda is a great example, said to have been built by the Normans, but in fact all the Normans did was fortify a mound that was already there. The true age of those mounds is not known. But certainly the story tells us that Cuailnge was there. The Finntraigh were said to have cleared the plains of Ireland for agriculture. So it's really interesting because in the actual history and archaeology of Ireland, we now know that there was an influx of people in the Neolithic, beginning around 6,000 years ago, around 4000 BC. People who we now know genetically had their origins in Turkey, in a place called Anatolia, what we call today Anatolia in Turkey. Probably wasn't called that back then. They had migrated westwards and eastwards out of Turkey, bringing farming with them. So before 6,000 years ago, there were no cows in Ireland, there were no cattle, there were no cows, there were no sheep, and there were no goats. And people didn't sow and harvest crops. Before 6,000 years ago, there was another population here called, in archaeology, called the Mesolithic, the hunter-gatherers. Mesolithic meaning the Middle Stone Age. And they seem to have lived a very frugal and basic lifestyle. Basically, you got up in the morning and you spent your whole day looking for food. Whether you're hunting it, whether you're fishing for it, foraging, at that time of year, especially in the autumn, nuts and berries, and trying to store up as much as you could. Suddenly we had this change, farming, and it's really interesting that we have, in the real history of Ireland, we have a sequence of arrivals and invasions. After the Ice Age, so sometime around 10 to 12,000 years ago, Ireland was uninhabited because the final phase of the Ice Age, I think that's the one called the Pleistocene, isn't it? Some of the ice sheets were like half a kilometre to a kilometre thick, deep, a scouring hall. It was impossible for people to live here. So the first influx of people after the Ice Age probably, almost certainly came from Scotland. That short hop, if you've ever taken a boat, a ferry from Larne to Stranraer, it is said that standing at Stranraer, looking across, you can actually count the cows in the fields in Northern Ireland. I think 13 miles, I think it is, the shortest distance between Ireland and Scotland. And then you have this new influx, the Neolithic people. At the end of the Neolithic, something happened to those people that we don't fully understand. The Neolithic population of Ireland disappear from the record. They are not, by and large, not present in the modern gene pool of Ireland. They died out by questionable means, but the most likely thing that killed them was a plague. Which is interesting because we have the story of Partholon and his people dying of a plague and being buried in mounds. So the new people that come in are the ones in archaeology called the Beaker folk and the Bell Beaker folk. And that's simply because they have this particular type of round bottom pot that the Germans called a becker, and that translated into English as beaker. And within a couple of centuries of their arrival, they begin to smelt copper and bronze, and thus begins what we call the Bronze Age. The Copper Age, generally called the Chalcolithic. So that's around 2400 BC. So far we've Mesolithic people, we've Neolithic people. These are distinct populations. Mesolithic, Neolithic, Bell Beaker folk. Those, by the way, are the seed of the modern population of Ireland. In the past 20 to 25 years, geneticists have revealed that most people living in Ireland today, most of the indigenous people of Ireland, are related genetically to the Beaker folk. So when people go to Newgrange and they say, oh, I'm here to honour my ancestors, they're highly unlikely to be your genetic ancestors because they all died out and were replaced by a new influx of people. It feels like I'm going on a little bit of a diversion here, so I better just try and stick to the theme. But if you ever want to see what the Neolithic farmers of Ireland who built Newgrange looked like, the only pocket of survivors of that era are in Sardinia, in the Mediterranean. So if you ever go to Sardinia and look at the local people there, you'll see that they're olive skinned and they're generally smaller. They are the direct descendants of Neolithic farmers. Amazing stuff. And then, of course, we have an alleged arrival of the Celts, something that's now hotly disputed. When we were in school, it was almost as if the Celts were the beginning of proper, educated, artistic civilization in Ireland. The Iron Age, that they had come over from Europe, Hallstatt, etc., and had brought this particular type of art called Latin, and it was always assumed that that's when the Irish language was brought to Ireland. But now the geneticists are saying, actually, there's a problem with that theory because there's no evidence of an influx of people in the Iron Age. The last major influx of people in Ireland, and I'm talking about from now right back, the last major influx of people, if you discount the Vikings and you discount the Anglo-Normans, who were a significant, arrival in their own right, the last significant arrival of people into Ireland were the Bell Beaker folk in 2400 BC or thereabouts. So the Celts, the influence came, but it wasn't an invasion or an influx. Christianity, you could call it an arrival rather than an invasion. And then, of course, the Vikings and the Anglo-Normans. So what's that? Mesolithic, Neolithic, Bell Beaker folk, Vikings, Anglo-Normans, and later English. So there's your 6. And that's mirrored. Or, should I say, that is a mirror of what was in myth. So there's 6 arrivals in mythology, and there's 6 arrivals in reality. It's amazing to me how the history of a place can literally mimic its myth. Of course, what's at the root of it? We're an island, and we happen to be a very lush island, and it happens to be very easy to grow grass here to feed cattle. So you can see partly why it is that Ireland would have. We even had at one time a sort of an Irish gold rush because there's lots of gold in some of the mountains of Ireland. Why Moytura is interesting is because Moytura marks, the Second Battle of Moytura marks the arrival of the Dedamans. They were said to have come from the islands in the north of the world where they'd studied, magic and the Druidic And you'll see this in the manuscripts, diabolical arts, which is the monk's way of saying, well, that's very pagan, I don't approve of that whatsoever, down with this sort of thing, Father Ted. But they defeated the Firvolog, and this was basically the beginning of their time, and they became probably the favourite of all the mythological peoples, the mythological beings of the invasion myths, such that the Tuatha De Danann were still being worshipped. I don't know if that's the right word, but certainly the Tuatha De Danann were still being respected by the Irish people, even in the Middle Ages. And when this is evident from reading the manuscripts, the Tuatha De Danann were basically gods and goddesses. But the monks tried to make it out that they were either fallen angels or demons, or that they were ordinary mortal people who lived and died mortal deaths. But of course, in the belief of the indigenous people, the Tuatha De Danann were ever living, because they were deities. They couldn't be killed. And so belief in them continued right into the late medieval times as the fairies, the fairy folk, the diminished gods and goddesses. Moytura, as I say, the action, if you want to ever explore it, the archaeological landscape of Sligo is amazing. The passage tombs there are older than those of Newgrange and Outandouth, and I would particularly recommend going to Carrowkeel, the cairns up on top of the Brickleave Mountains, because that landscape has hardly been touched by human hands in the intervening millennia. Whereas you go to Newgrange and you can see roads and houses and farms. You know, the landscape of Brunabonia has been considerably altered by human activity in over, especially recent centuries. You go to Carrowkeel, and apart from a bit of stripping of bog, it's just like untouched since the Neolithic. You know, about 5,500 years of history right there beneath your feet, and the views on a clear day. It's very special, and you can see Moytura from Carrowkeel. Anyway, conscious of the fact that I'm rambling a little bit, the next major one is the one that is called Cath, the Battle of Tailtiu. This is where history changes. This is where the deities are defeated by mortal men. And this is the story of the arrival of the Milesians. So in Laura Gowalla. So there are translations of all this stuff, so you can access all of this stuff if you want. The Irish Text Society produces a lot of translations of Irish mythological material. This is Laura Gowalla Part 5. This is the final volume in Laura Gowalla, should I say, and it's about the sons of Mill. And it's very scholarly, but you can see the original for yourself, because what you'll see in a lot of books published in recent decades are what we call popularized versions of those stories. But if you want the originals, that's where to get them. Now they're not cheap. I think those beautiful green Wibbelin volumes from the Irish Text Society, they're generally, well, that one, I paid €60 for that. Price is still written on it. So that's knowledge comes at a price, you know. The Milesians were the sons of the King of Spain, Mil España, which literally translates as soldier of Spain, Spanish soldier. And a couple of relatives of his come to Ireland, and they see it from the north coast of Spain, Galicia. They see it from Brogan's Tower. Fascinatingly, there's still a tower in A Coruña in Galicia. There's a lot of commonality, as some of you may know. There's a lot of shared myth and history between the people of northern Spain and Ireland. Quite likely because, you know, for millennia, people were sailing up and down from the Mediterranean, up as far as Ireland and Britain. It was a familiar sea route. I mean, the Neolithic people who literally brought cows here, we think they came from France, because the closest cognates to the passage tombs in the Boyne Valley are those in northwestern France. and they probably arrived into Britain and Ireland at the same time. So they were basically a maritime culture. They were well accustomed to sailing. And I can't imagine what that must be like. You look out there today and see how fast the wind turbines are spinning because it's windy. Imagine putting into a wicker boat with a cowskin hide on it and trying to cross the channel from France to Britain and then from there to Ireland. No thanks. So a hazardous thing. The king's relatives, while they're here, speak to the Tuatha De Danann and lavish. They heap lavish praise on Ireland. They say it's a very beautiful land, and then the Tuatha De Danann get suspicious. They want to take it over, so they kill them. And this is why Mil España sends his sons. Now, there's different accounts as to how many sons he had, but there's something like 8 of them, and he sends them over in an expedition in a fleet of ships to wrest control of Ireland from the Tuatha De Danann. Now, I don't know whether this is based on real events or not, but again, where myth and history mirror each other, this is fascinating. This is the Spanish Armada of the Bronze Age. The Bronze Age is when we're told this happens. The annals try to put a specific time frame on this. And we're told this arrival happened around 1700 BC, which is fascinating because the Beaker folk had arrived into Ireland, in 2400 BC. It kind of ties in with the same period. So they come in their fleet of ships and they arrive at a place called Inverskeithne, which is in Kerry, and they park up and they walk across Ireland. And this is where it's myth. They encounter the 3 guardian goddesses of Ireland, what the scholars would call the tutelary goddesses, Bamba and Fola and Era. And it's a peculiar story because of this. Rather than the goddesses saying, don't come here, you're all going to be slaughtered, they actually say the opposite. They basically forecast that they're going to be successful in their mission. And all they need to do to guarantee success is to treat honestly and fairly with the goddesses. And so each one asks in turn a specific question. And it's not done the oldest of the brothers, the one who would naturally become the first king of Ireland if they're successful. It's Amergin, their poet, their bard, who does the negotiation. The female goddesses, they speak directly to Amergin. And all they want, in each case, is a guarantee. When you win, will you name the country after me? And Amergin says yes. He meets Eru, the third, but probably probably considered the principle of the triple spiral is fascinating. The triple spiral of Newgrange. So many people have said this. You see these triplicate deities and figures in mythology and the lore of Ireland who are basically 3 in 1. Bamba, Fola and Era are an example of that. But Era at Ishnok, before any of the Milesian brothers opens his mouth, Era says, "Oh, your coming to Ireland has long been foretold by our soothsayers or our, fortune tellers." And she basically forecasts that they'll be successful. And she says to Amergin, "Will you guarantee that you'll name Ireland after me when you're successful?" Amergin says, "Yes, it will be done." And that's where Ireland gets its name from. This story gives Ireland its Irish name, Era. Later, Ireland. Ireland is an anglicisation of Ireland. And everything seems to be going swimmingly for the Milesians. It's almost like they've been just granted access. But then they have to go and talk to the 3 in 1 High Kings of Ireland, who are now, obviously, I have to spoil the story before I tell it, who are now considered the last of the Tuatha De Danann Kings of Ireland. And they are called Macul, Macecht and Magrange, meaning son of the hazel, son of the plough, and son of the sun. It's fascinating. Because to me, just in that, you have son of the hazel, a very, very important food source in Ireland, even before the Neolithic. In fact, a very important food source in the Mesolithic. Very strongly associated with knowledge through the story of the Salmon of Knowledge. What did the Salmon of Knowledge eat when it was in the well of Segish? It ate from the 9 magic hazel trees that dropped the nuts into the water of the well. And when they plopped down, the salmon would eat them. That's where he got his knowledge from. And the story in folklore is, you know, the way the salmon has dots or speckles on its back. Each one of those in folklore represents a magic hazelnut that it ate. So the bigger the fish, the more spots, the more hazelnuts it ate, the wiser it is. And it's a curious thing, because nutritionists will tell you that a hazelnut is about, if you were to pick one nut that you could eat that would give you, very good nutrition, the hazelnut is top of the pile. In the Mesolithic, people were eating fish and hazelnuts in abundance. Very little meat, because there was no cows, so no beef. There were no sheep, there were no goats. What were you eating as meat in the Mesolithic? Wild boar, but you had to catch it first. Think of, bacon, pork, but that was a delicacy. This is a total diversion now, stop it, Anthony. When the Neolithic came, the diet, there was a lot more red meat introduced into the diet and grain. Believe it or not, the lifespan shortened in the Neolithic. You were healthier in the Mesolithic. It was harder work to find food, but imagine all those fish oils and hazelnuts. Perfect. A brilliant diet. So, McCool, McKechnie and McGrania were told reigned at Tara, which is peculiar because Tara is later named after the wife of the first Milesian High King of Ireland. Anyway, nevertheless, this is myth after all. And this is where things take a turn. McCool, McKechnie and McGrania tell the Milesians, oh, it's not just going to be as straightforward as you think. We want you to go all the way back down to Kerry where you park your boats, get into your ships, push off into the sea and go out into the waves a distance of 9 waves from the shore. And if you can make it back to land a second time, we'll give you Ireland. We'll let you take it. Now, I don't know about you, but I would have been highly suspicious at this point. But Amragan, who, again, not the oldest brother and not the military leader, the bard, says to his brothers, what do you think, lads? And they say, yeah, I think we'd agree to that. And they agree to that. They go back down, get into their boats, push off from the shore, distance of 9 waves, and what do you think happens?
Oh, geez.
Not far off the truth.
Huge wave.
Yeah, that's closer to it. The two of the Danann raise a huge storm on the sea.
There you go.
And then the sun came out and it became warm. That was funny, wasn't it? Yeah. So they raised a huge tempest, and this is where it becomes like a mythological foreshadowing of the real Spanish Armada, because the fleet is tossed about and half wrecked on the Atlantic. Dun, the eldest of the brothers, and his plan was, I'm going to be the first mortal High King of Ireland, because when we're successful, I'm the oldest brother, and I'll get the title. You see, what happened at Uisneach, when Eru said to Amragan, you're going to be successful, and all you need to do is name the country after me, Dun disrespected her. He said to Amragan, don't listen to her. Don't mind her. We want to take this country. We'll do so through the strength of our own arms and our own might. He disrespected her. And she told him there and then, you won't share in the bounty of this land. She basically told him, it's never going to be yours. And so he was the first casualty. He was tossed off the mast of the boat into the ocean and drowned. So the fleet was dispersed. Some of the brothers were killed. Some of the ships sank. So for instance, if you're familiar with the place name in the Boyne Estuary called Cope, the townland of Cope, C-O-L-P-E, it's said that is named after Colpa, C-O-L-P-A, was one of the Milesian brothers who drowned, because when they arrived in Ireland, they buried him close to the Boyne. Now the fleet is dispersed, and there are 2 groups going, one south and one north around the island. I just think about what happened, wasn't it the 1500s, 16th century, wasn't it, the Spanish Armada, and how so many of them met their end in the Atlantic, particularly off the northwest coast. Anyway, Amragan is the leader of one of the boats, and at one point he steps up to the front of the ship and he utters an incantation. And so he does. I promise you he does. I'm trying to read it. If I can find my specs, which I got there, yes. He basically stands up at the front of the ship and utters a poem. And it goes something like this. I seek is how it's translated here, but John Moriarty had a lovely translation. I invoke the land of Ireland. Coursed be the fruitful sea, fruitful the ranked highland, ranked the showery wood, showery the river of cataracts the lake of pools the hill of a well of a people of assemblies of the king of Tara, king, hill of peoples of the sons of meal of ships of barks, the high ship Eru, which is the name of his own boat. He's named it after the principal guardian goddess of Ireland. We're not told whether he'd done that after he'd met her at Ishnok or whether he'd done that when he set out from Spain. Eru lofty, very green, and incantation very cunning, etc., etc. And in invoking the land of Ireland, he makes the sea calm. He basically, a human mortal bard, quells the magic of the Tuatha Dé Danann, the magic of the gods. And at this point, victory is assured. And what happens is they sail down into the Irish Sea and they put into port in a place that we call today the Boyne Estuary, Inver Culpa. And Ambergin steps out of the boat, and as soon as he puts his foot on the shore at Mornington, at Inver Culpa, Ireland is now, the war is over, the battle is over, because the Danans were told by the kings of the Tuatha Dé Danann, if you can make it a second time, we'll let you take Ireland. And this is why what happens afterwards is interesting. Tailtiu, the Battle of Tailtiu or Tailtiu. And the reason this is interesting is there's really no need for this battle to take place. They've already won the victory. They've already been assured. The agreement that was reached between the Tuatha Dé Danann and the Milesians was, we are going to allow you to reign over the surface land of Ireland. We are going to go into our the she mounds, which are, we think, the passage tombs, and we're going to rule the underworld. And this is the peace that's agreed between them, except for it was said afterwards that the Tuatha Dé Danann, being a little bit annoyed about the fact that they had lost control of Ireland to the Milesians, would sometimes interfere with the crop and the harvest and make the harvest fail, and then they needed to make peace again. But the Battle of Tailtiu is a battle that takes place after all of this. And Tailtiu, again, not too far away, I don't know if you've heard of a place called Tailtown. It's between Navan and Kells. It's in a bend of the Blackwater River. The Blackwater is a tributary of the Boyne. It's probably about, 20 kilometres or 25 kilometres from here by road. You can get there from here in about half an hour, I'd say. Tailtiu is basically a symbolic battle. There's no need for it. But it has echoes of this Moytura thing, where it's almost like a symbolic battle needs to take place. Because what's already taken place, if you think about it, has been more a spiritual, poetic battle. The bard of the Milesians is the one doing all the negotiating. The guardian goddesses tell him, you're going to be all right, just name it after us. The kings tell him, well, we'll promise you Ireland if you can make it a second time, which they did. There's no need for a battle to take place. Tailtiu was the daughter of a woman called Maimór, who was married to Jochi Mac Eric. They were the last king and queen of the Firvolk. And Tailtiu was said to specifically have been the one who cleared. You remember I said earlier on the Firvolk cleared Ireland for agriculture? She was the one who specifically cleared the plain of Brega for agriculture. In other words, meat by and large. Brega, scholars looking at what was then Brega say Meath is mostly what Brega was. I think Brega stretched from kind of North Dublin up into the middle of Louth. She was the foster mother of Lou Lawfather, Lou Samil Donach, Lou MacEthnan, who's a very famous figure in the Tuatha Dé Danann. And we are in County Louth, aren't we? Storina is County Louth.
It's actually
No.
Meath.
This is Meath, is it?
Oh, yeah.
But see, just over there, that's definitely County Louth right
Yeah.
there. So Louth is named after Lou Samaldonach. If you look at I believe it's the only county in Ireland named after a Tuatha Dé Danann deity. If you look at the modern crest of County Louth, you will see the words Lou Samaldonach on the county crest. Lou's foster mother was Tailtiu. She cleared Meath, but she died of exhaustion at the end of it. And Tailtiu is a very important place for other reasons, other than this symbolic battle that, as I said, there doesn't seem to be any need for. Because in her honour, Lou inaugurates an annual Éineachar assembly, a gathering of people, and a major celebration to commemorate her life. And that is what scholars refer to as the Irish Olympic Games. Except for, we should call the Greek Olympic Games the Tailtian Games, because according to our I was going to say our myths, but some of it is claimed as historically accurate. I don't know. But according to our traditions, the Games of Tailtian were inaugurated about 2000 BC, which would make them almost a millennium older than the Greek Olympic Games. Held annually in honour of this lady Tailtiu, who was the foster mother of Lou. And as I say, again, fairly local to this area. So, Moytura, yeah, Tailtiu, there's the two of the three major ones. Because of time, I didn't intend to speak much about Finntraigh because it's in Kerry, and no harm to the people of Kerry, but I just thought we'd keep the talk as local as possible. The other major war of mythology, especially connected with this area, is Táin Cuailnge. Táin Cuailnge literally means the cattle raid of Cooley, or the cattle raid of the Cuailnge and Cooley, yes, both the same thing. But the war was essentially over a particularly special bull. So this is the myth, and again, this is a saga. It's a long story. I'm sure you've all read it, or let's have a show of hands. Anybody who's either read the Táin or is quite familiar with it? Yeah. But everybody in the room has heard of Cuailnge and, and some of his escapades. Anybody ever heard of Finntraigh? Yeah. And so anybody from RD,
Yeah.
Heard, yeah.
Well, actually, I'm from Knockbridge, where the stone is, well.
Club Farmore. Yeah. The stone where Cuailnge died. Oh, I've spoiled the story in case you haven't read it. He dies at the end. That was like the first time I was going to see Titanic, the movie, and somebody who may or may not have been related to me as I was going into the cinema said, "Oh, Jack dies in the end."
What?
Yeah. But the Cooley saga is the largest of a type of story that is called cattle raids. So this is where it's ostensibly myth, right? But it's definitely based on real aspects of early medieval society, because cattle rustling in Ireland was a significant issue. It still happens to this day, very, very occasionally, even though cattle are tagged now. So, this whole farm to fork thing, traceability and all that. But cattle still get stolen in 21st century Ireland. There was a major issue in medieval Ireland, partly because once cows were brought to Ireland in the Neolithic, until the minting of coins and, I suppose, a change in direction for what became currency, cows were currency. For 4,000 years in Ireland, the measure of your wealth was how many cows you had. You didn't rob a bank in 500 AD. There were no banks to rob, there's no coins. If somebody was wealthier than you, it's because they had more cows. So if you wanted to take some of that for yourself, you stole it. Anyway, it's the largest of those myths. There are several others: Táin Frick, Táin Rigalma, Táin Fleish, etc. But this is the big one. And basically it's a war that begins with a pillow talk, the famous pillow talk. So this is at this point I always give the little bit of matrimonial or marital advice to the men in particular. If you're in the bed and it's night time and it's nearly time to turn off the light and go to sleep, and your wife starts talking about stuff, absolutely 100% always say, "You're right, dear. You're right, darling." Give her a peck on the cheek, roll over, turn off the light, go to sleep. On this particular occasion, the king and queen of Crochu, or Rathcroghan, Connacht, Maeve and Eileen are having a pillow talk. And Maeve and Eileen, they're kind of boasting about all the wealth that they have and all the excellent things that they have. And then Maeve makes the mistake. Well, it's not Maeve that made the mistake, it was Eileen that made the mistake. But Maeve mentions that she has the finest bull in all of Ireland in the form of a bull called the Finntraigh. Finntraigh literally means the white-horned. And Eileen, at this point again, should have just said, "You're right, darling. Do you know what? I think we'll just go to sleep now." But what does he say? He says, "Oh no, I hear there's a finer bull than that, the Cuailnge, over on the other side of the country." And literally that is what sparks a war between the provinces of Connacht and Ulster, because she sends, what would you call it, a delegation, we would use that word in modern parlance. She sends a delegate, what's the other word, emissaries, over to Cooley to have a look at the bull. And her emissaries are treated, a very important aspect of medieval society, really in reality and also in myth, is hospitality to the stranger. Stranger or someone that is not from your tribe or your area comes to your home, you are expected to give them a bed and to feed them, scull a few drinks, which is an aspect of Irish society that is equally real and mythological. So they get drunk, and basically the emissaries kind of start boasting about how, if you just don't give us that bull, we're going to come and take it ourselves. And this is the outbreak of the war. If you know anything about it, to summarise it, Maeve leads the Connacht army across the country coming to Ulster to basically take the bull. The Ulstermen should be defending Ulster, but they suffer from a thing called a wasting sickness, and that relates to, in particular, an episode that happened in Armagh when the goddess Macha was heavily pregnant and was made to race against a horse. And she was pregnant with twins. She beat the horse in the race, but she collapsed and died at the finish line after giving birth to the twins of Awen. Awen is where Awen Macha comes from, the royal site that is today known as Navan Fort, just outside Armagh city. And so this is the curse that's placed on the Ulstermen, because literally the King of Ulster made her race against a horse when she was heavily pregnant. The curse was that the Ulster armies would suffer from this, the pangs of childbirth, just at critical moments when they were most needed. And here's where Cuailnge steps in and single-handedly lops off the heads of dozens, and in some cases hundreds, of warriors. An interesting sort of undertone to Táin Cuailnge is that there's an aspect of it, the culmination of it. There's two culminations, really, three. Okay, sorry. Let me just think about this. This is like, nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. Our chief weapons are surprise, and our ruthless, and then they have to start again. So there's a key point in Táin Cuailnge is the 3-day battle between Cuailnge and his best friend Finntraigh. They're literally sworn brothers. They're not literally brothers, but they treat each other like brothers. At the end of which Cuailnge kills Finntraigh with the Fir Volach, which is the magic barbed spear that he fires underwater with his foot. Then the death of Cuailnge, which happens at Knockbridge at a stone that is still today called Cloch Far Mór, which literally translates as the stone of the big man, but far more being another way in antiquated Irish saying giant, the stone of the giant, because as he was dying, Cuchulainn was still full of bravery, even though he was bleeding out, and he did not want to lie down in front of his enemies, so he actually strapped himself to the stone so that he would die standing up. There's a very famous statue in the GPO of Cuchulainn with the crow on his shoulder, and this is where, in an echo of the story of Dun in the Milesian episode. Do you remember I said Dun disrespected Eru at Uisneach, and she told him, "You're for it," and he was. There's an episode in Táin Cuailnge where the Morrigan, the great, she's said to be the goddess of battle, but that simplifies it far too much, where she comes and basically offers herself to him, and he spurns her by saying, "I have no time for women's thighs." And she comes at him during key battles as a wolf, and an eel wraps herself around his legs, and he has to deal with her. And eventually she comes to him when he's in battle and he's very thirsty, she comes to him as a milch cow, and she offers him a drink from her teats. And after he accepts the drink, she says he'll be dead by the end of the year. And it is her in the form of a crow who lands on his shoulder as he's dying to basically let him know, "You should have treated me differently." And the reason I'm bringing that up, in part because it ties into the whole Dun era thing, is because Morrigan offered herself to Dagda at the River Unshin in Sligo. She was bathing seductively, and Dagda took this as an invitation, and they made love. And this feeds into the whole narrative of, if you treat the goddess right, you'll be successful. And of course they were successful at Moytura against the Fervolog in the first case and the Fomorians in the second case. Oh yeah, don't forget, there's another Louth connection here through Lugh, because the culmination of the Battle of Moytura, the second battle, it had long been prophesied that Balor, who was the king of the Fomorians, so I don't know if any of you have been into Drogheda lately and seen the murals. So the latest one that was painted just last year depicts Balor. He's on the side of the Scotch Hall building. He was like a cyclops. He had a single great eye in his head. He was the king of the Fomorians in this second battle of Moytura against the Tuatha De Danann. It had long been prophesied that Balor would be killed by his own grandson. But in order to prevent the prophecy from coming true, when Balor and his wife Cethlen had a daughter, she was called Ethna, Balor cruelly imprisoned her in a tower on Tory Island. If you've ever been to Tory Island, as I have, there is a prominent part of the island on the east of the island called Dún Valor, literally meaning the fort of Balor. And there are pinnacles of rocks sticking up, and the locals say that one of those is the tower where he imprisoned Ethna. So Ethna not only never encountered a man as she was growing up, she didn't know what a man was, because she wasn't told. And this is the thing that Balor wanted to make sure that Ethna was never going to get into a relationship and never conceive a child, because that child could be a son and all the rest. So what happens is there is a Tuatha De Danann figurehead called Cian, and Cian hears about Ethna's plight, and with the help of a sort of a druidess called Bearog, he goes to Tory Island and he disguises himself as some sort of a handmaiden. And Balor is not suspicious. This is a Monty Python thing, you know. Are there any women here today? No. And they've all got clip-on beards on, you know. So Cian successfully makes it to Balor, Balor Island, to Tory Island, and the rest is history. You can fill in the gaps. He reveals that he's a man, and they have a relationship, and she gets pregnant. Now, I think there are slightly different versions of the story, but certainly in one version, she delivers triplets, and Balor very cruelly wraps them up in a sheet and carries them out over the Atlantic and just drops them into the water. Again, in defiance of this prophecy, but one of them survives, and that one is the one that's called Lugh. So Lugh has lots of names. When he comes to Tara first, in the Battle of Moytura, to offer his help to King Nuadu, he's called Lugh Lunanstrek. He's called Lugh Mac Ethna, Lugh the son of Ethna, Lugh Lawfather, Lugh of the long arm, which is presumably got to do with the fact that he's very skilled with a slingshot, and he can fire a missile from a slingshot a long way. And the other one is Lugh Samel Donach, the one that's on the crest of Louth. And that's because when he came to Tara, he was told you can't come into Tara unless you offer a gift, a skill that the king can use. And he lists 12 different skills that he has, and then becomes known as the Samel Donach, the many-gifted, Lugh the many-gifted. So the culmination of Moytura, the second battle of Moytura, is that Balor is leading the Fomorians. We should at this point be in a situation where Nuadu is leading the Tuatha Dé Danann, but actually after Lugh comes to Tara, it's really Lugh who takes over, even though he's not the king. And Lugh marshals the figureheads of the Tuatha Dé Danann for the battle. And the culmination of it is that Lugh confronts Balor, and Lugh is, of course, Balor's grandfather, in fulfillment of the prophecy. Balor orders that his great eye be opened. His eyelid was so big that he needed 4 assistants, 4 warriors to open it for him. And there were 2 things about his eye. One was that it could burn you, or burn the landscape, according to how much he opened it. So if he opened it only a small bit, the plants would wither, but if he opened it fully, everything would go on fire. But the other thing was a little bit like Medusa. If you looked at his eye when he opened it, you'd turn to stone. And the reason the Balor mural is in Drogheda is because there's a story about how he tried to steal the magic cow from Ulster and bring it down to Leinster. And when he got past the Boyne, the cow had its calf with it, and they kept the calf in front. The servant, Balor's servant, kept the calf in front so that the cow would think everything's fine. But at one point after they crossed the Boyne, the calf fell behind the cow, and the cow turned around to look at where the calf was, and then could see that Ulster was a long way back, and screamed aloud. The cow screamed. Don't know what that sounds like. You can just imagine it yourselves. And at this point, Balor opened his great eye to see what was happening, and turned the cow and calf into 2 rocks that became the Rockabill Islands. So if you know Rockabill, off the coast of Skerries, has a lighthouse on it. And from the Boyne estuary, there's standing stones there that are aligned to Rockabill for winter solstice sunrise. So that's why Balor is in Drogheda, because it's a local version of that story. The story about the magic cow being stolen by Balor and taken to Tory Island is told in Donegal even to this day. So he says, open my great eye, and just as he opens his eye, Lugh is getting ready with a slingshot, a weapon that's called the Tathlum, Tathlum. It's a concrete ball, but it consists of the brains of Lugh's slain enemies hardened with lime. Very, very peculiar weapon. And he, just at the perfect moment, he releases the Tathlum, and just as Balor's eyes beginning to open, splat, he's killed by this missile from Lugh. And not only is he killed, it comes out the back of his head and splats the poison that is inside him over half of the Fomorian army, who also dropped dead. And this is the key moment. This is the moment of victory, really, in the Battle of Moytura. There is a version of that told in Donegal. There's a version of, so Moytura is ostensibly in Sligo, but there's a version of the story told in Donegal. There's a lovely translation of it, done by some lads from Donegal. It's called Lugh na Bua, which I think means Lugh the Victorious. Not entirely sure. It wouldn't be a major Gaelgore. Have you ever heard of Dunlewy, the Poison Glen? Well, the story there is that when Balor was defeated, the poison leaked out of his eye and formed the Poison Glen. That's where the name comes from. When he was a youngster, Balor, I don't know who belonging to Balor, somebody was making a potion in a cauldron, and he went over because he was curious, and he lifted the lid, and apparently the poison came out and went into his eye, and this is how his eye got poisoned in the first place. So that's, I've kind of back and forth between Táin Cuailnge and Moytura, and Tailtiu we've mentioned, and the only one I probably haven't got really any time to talk about. The Battle of Finntraigh belongs to the Finn cycle, which scholars would say is a later cycle of stories. Finn McCool and the Fianna and his son Oisin and his grandson Oscar and all their escapades. But it's curious because it's got echoes of the earlier invasion stuff. There's a vast army that's coming to Ireland to take control of it. So again, we have echoes of previous stories. And they're led by this mysterious figurehead called Dara Dun, who is described in the myth as the king of the world. But the scholars reckon he was either from Scythia or Spain, which again has it feeds into it has echoes of the other stories. And it's a long story, a very good popular version. I don't know if you've ever seen this book, Lady Gregory's Complete Irish Mythology. So there's two sets of stories in that. One is Cuailnge of Merhevna, which is basically Táin, Cuailnge and associated stories. But the first one is Gods and Fighting Men. So the first half of that, Gods and Fighting Men, is really about the Tuatha Dé Danann, and the second half is about the Fianna. But there's a section that is called the Battle of the White Strand, and it consists of 13, I think, chapters. So it's a long story, but the long and short of it is what makes the Fianna victorious over the armies of the world. They need the help of the Tuatha Dé Danann. And remember that the Tuatha Dé Danann have previously been vanquished themselves and have gone underground, as it were, into their mounds. And this is a peculiar aspect of the Danann mythology / folklore and even prophecy. The persistent belief, even in recent centuries, that the Tuatha Dé Danann will come back. And in times of strife and in times of actually some folk versions of it will say that at the end of the world Tuatha Dé Danann will come back and fight for the glory of Ireland, and they will be victorious. So this persistent belief that they're there in their mounds just waiting for the call, and in some cases they're even said that they will be led by Lú Láfada, they'll be led by Lú Samaldánach as they throng out of the she-mounds at the end of the world to bring Ireland. I think that's brilliant. I'm nearly beating my chest as I say it. But at Finntraigh or Finntraigh, the Fianna could not have defeated Dara Dun and the armies of the world without the magical intervention of the Tuatha Dé Danann.